So, yesterday I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey for the very first time, but it wasn't just a normal viewing of the movie, it was a special 50th anniversary 70mm film screening of 2001. And I do feel privileged for seeing it in that format, because it's not every day that you see a film in the cinema that's shown in its original 70mm format. And I will admit, it was an overwhelming experience to say the least. And I'm glad I saw it, especially in that format as a first-time viewing, because I don't think you can really beat seeing it in its original format, for your first time. And I'm still trying to process the film at this moment in time. I know how I feel about certain bits of the film, and that's why I wanted to make this video. This is not a review of 2001: A Space Odyssey. At this point in time, I cannot give a rating for this movie because I still am having trouble trying to process everything that happened, especially stuff that happens towards the end of the film. But I thought I would make this video to basically express my initial first impressions of the movie and see how it kind of compares to what other people who absolutely love this movie think of it. So I'm going to start off talking about the visuals in this movie, and I've got to admit, for a movie that came out in 1968, the visuals are still absolutely stunning to look at. The cinematography and the practical effects both combined to make probably one of the best looking films ever made. I cannot deny this is one of the best looking films that I've ever seen. Every single edit, every single shot is methodically crafted and just is like imprinted into your brain. There are some images in this film that I don't think will ever leave my head, and I'm saying that as a good thing. I really like the way this movie looked. The lighting and the set design are phenomenal. Some of the camera work in this film is just mind-boggling. I have no idea how they got certain shots. And again, saying that about a film that came out in 1968 is pretty impressive. And the fact that there's no computer-generated effects whatsoever is, again, really, really impressive. So from a visual standpoint, I cannot fault this movie whatsoever. Stanley Kubrick knows exactly what he was doing behind the camera. Not just for this film, but for most of his other films, because 2001: A Space Odyssey is not the first Kubrick film that I've seen. The only other Stanley Kubrick films that I've seen in their entirety are Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, A Clockwork Orange, and Dr. Strangelove. Personally, at this moment in time, I wouldn't class 2001 as one of my favourites in his filmography that I've seen, but I do think it's the most visually striking of his films that I have seen to this point. So, right, I could talk about the story in 2001, but there isn't really a story to 2001. At least there's no, on an initial viewing, there is no cohesive plot throughout the film. There are individual little stories, but there's no main plot that connects the film. The only thing that connects the film is its themes, which I'll get onto later, but there's no overall story that keeps the movie going. You have the first section of the film, which is about primitive man when we were monkeys and how they evolved, and then it fast forward several million years into the future, where you then have the story with Dave, Frank, and Hal 9000, which is probably the best part of the film, and I think a lot of people agree with that. It's definitely the highlight, because it's the part of the film where actual stuff is going on. It's where some sort of a plot is actually taking place, and you can kind of get on board with it. I didn't really feel connected to any of the characters, but for what it was, I liked the way that entire thing was executed. And then the last 20 minutes of the film happen, and yeah, I'll get more onto that specifically in a minute, but yeah, I'm still perplexed with that ending, like, at this moment in time. One thing I will say about this movie, and I'm going to say it here because I do think it has a direct impact on how the story plays out, is its pacing and how it's edited. Now, like I said a minute ago, the editing in this movie is methodical. You can tell that every single cut happens at the right time for when Stanley Kubrick wanted it to happen. And the pacing in this movie is not really dependent on the editing as per se, but just the pacing of shots and things that happen in general is excruciatingly slow, and that's the main nitpick a lot of people have with this movie, and I will admit it did bother me at times. There are some sequences that just go on for a bit too long. I mean, the movie is about 2 hours and 41 minutes long, and that is why I've never watched it before. I have owned a copy of 2001 for a couple of years now, but its length is the main reason why I've never watched it at home. And that's why I'm glad I went to a cinema to see this movie for the first time, so I could really take in everything that happens. Okay, next up is the sound of the movie, and right, this is going to be a bit of a weird, tricky one to talk about, because there are some bits that I like about the sound in this movie, but there are some bits that I don't. For example, the score of the movie is phenomenal. It's one of the best I've ever heard in a film. Like, I don't think I've heard classical pieces of music used that effectively in a film. And the way that they are used, especially like the main theme of the film and certain pieces by Johann Strauss, are just really, really nice and really complement the feel of the film really, really well. But unfortunately, and I suppose this is more of a personal thing because it's mostly affected by the screening of the film that I went to, is that some of the sound effects that they decide to use in this film are rather grating, to say the least. And the reason I say it's more of a personal preference is because I went to see this at the Picture House Central in London. And even though seeing it in true 70mm on a huge, huge screen was immersive as it is, they decided to turn up the volume to a ridiculous level, which is why there are certain aspects of the sound in this movie that I can't really fully appreciate, which is why I'm glad I own the Blu-ray so I can watch back at certain scenes and fully take them in, because there were some moments in the film where the volume was just so fucking loud that you actually couldn't hear certain things happening. And that kind of ruined the experience slightly. The fact that it was so loud. It was as loud as a concert, and I've been to quite a few concerts in my time. You could hear the speakers struggling to cope with the how much volume was coming through the speakers. But yeah, the volume of the sound was not pleasant. And that kind of leads on to my next point, where there were a few sound effects, particularly the feedback sound effect, and these weird breathing sounds that you heard whenever one of the astronauts was in one of their spacesuits. and you just get these long, drawn-out sections that are very slow, and there is no audio whatsoever except for intense, heavy breathing straight into a microphone. And apparently, I don't know how true this is, but apparently that is Kubrick himself recording the breathing. And it works for a scene later on in the movie where the breathing kind of intensifies the tension within the scene. But the first time the breathing happens, it does get a bit annoying and grating after a while. So the last aspect of this film that I want to touch upon is the themes and meanings that I got from this movie, and take into account this was the first time I'd seen it, so I don't know whether these are right or wrong, but these are just what my interpretations of the film were when I saw it. And obviously there's going to be spoilers in this section, so if you haven't seen the film or if you don't really care, I'd tune out of the video at this point. But yeah, for those of you that have seen it, my initial interpretations of the film after seeing it is that even though the individual stories don't particularly connect at first, the thing that does connect them is the theme of evolution, and how man creates a tool for themselves to use and then ends up using that tool as a weapon, and then it becomes their destruction, is mirrored in both the first act and the second act. You have the monkeys, they find a bone, they then use the bone as a tool to kill animals and eat, but then they use that tool as a weapon, using it on each other. That same theme is then reflected in the HAL 9000 section of the film, where they have created HAL 9000, which is supposed to be the most intelligent artificial intelligence ever created. He never gets anything wrong. He knows exactly what he's doing, and it was created as a tool. But then when he realizes that Frank, Dave, and the other crew members that are humans are not up to the task of the mission at hand, he then starts killing them off. The tool that they created is now becoming the weapon and is killing them. At least that's what I thought the theme was in the film, and it seemed pretty evident at that point. But then the last 20 minutes happen, where Dave gets sucked through, I presume, like a wormhole or a Stargate, and ends up in a weird-looking room, and then the monolith appears, and then he turns into a big space baby. That threw me off. I was pretty on board with the whole, theme of evolution as the main connecting point for these individual stories, but then when those last 20 minutes happen, it really did throw me off, and it's definitely going to be one of those things that I will hopefully understand the more I watch it, but at this moment in time, I'm just really perplexed by that whole thing. The whole idea of the reoccurring monolith thing, though, yeah, I suppose there's various interpretations and ways you can look at what its significance is. Is it alien? Is it something that, shows... envisions God, or is it simply something that marks a specific point in time where that change that I said involving evolution finally occurs? Because in the first act, everything's fine and dandy among the primitive humans, and then the monolith appears, and then that is when they start using the bones as a tool and then as a weapon. The same goes for the second act, where they find the monolith, and it's not until after they find it that is when HAL 9000 starts killing people. So maybe the monolith is kind of a connecting theme to show as soon as the monolith appears, that is when that version of man evolves, and not in a good way. So basically, like, every time you see the monolith in the film, it's kind of, you know, marking the point where, yeah, evolution's about to kind of fuck itself again. Like I said, though, these are just my initial interpretations of the movie. These are probably not right whatsoever. I don't think there is a right or wrong way to interpret this film. But I'm definitely going to have to watch this at some point in the future again. And I'm glad I got to see it on the biggest screen possible. And yeah, there's no rating for this film. This isn't a review. This is just me kind of channeling what I thought of the film. Yeah, it's definitely one of those movies you have to see at least once in your life. Maybe more times if you want to properly interpret the film, which I'm interested in doing at some point in the future. But I think this movie for me is going to be like the original Blade Runner. When I first saw Blade Runner, I liked it, but I didn't love it. But it wasn't until future re-watches of the film that I came to appreciate it and really, really like it. And I feel like the same thing applies to 2001. I liked it on its first viewing, but I hope that with more viewings in the future, I will appreciate it more as a film and love it even more, hopefully. Because 2001 is one of those films where I want to love it as much as other people do. There are other films where I've gone into it going, okay, this is hopefully good, and then watched it and gone, actually, that wasn't that good. It was kind of shit. But this is one of those films where I'm determined to want to like it, you know, really like it at some point. At the moment, I think it's good. From a filmmaking standpoint, from a technical aspect, it's flawless. But there are just certain things in it that are stopping me from liking it more than I do. So yeah, I thought I'd do this little video because it's just something, you know, interesting, and seeing that it celebrated its 50th anniversary last month, thought it'd be an interesting video to talk about, kind of change things up a little bit. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye.